The lonely cowboy rode in town alone for supplies, but found a hungry bride begging for bread in Dry Creek, Wyoming territory, winter 1877. Snow blanketed the streets of Dry Creek in muffled silence. The sky, gray and heavy, pressed low over the buildings like it wanted to crush the town flat. Wind scraped through the alleyways, carrying dust, ice, and the distant howl of something that might have once been a wolf. Sawyer Reed rode in alone. He was 34 years old, tall in the saddle, a man carved from dust and wind. He had lived the last 5 winters alone up in the high plains, in a cabin built by his own hands. He came down to town only when the pantry ran low, or when the silence at night pressed too deep against his bones.
Enjoy it.
Today he needed salt, ammunition, whiskey. He dismounted outside the general store. But a sharp scent of fresh bread caught his attention, and he turned toward the bakery 2 doors down. The warmth from the open oven spilled into the air, a rare comfort in the middle of such bitter cold. Sawyer reached for the door. But something in the snow caught his eye. Kneeling beside the refuse barrel outside the bakery was a woman, young, barehanded. Her dress, once finely made, judging by the torn lace sleeves, was now little more than rags. Her skin was blotched red from the cold. She reached inside the barrel with shaking fingers and pulled out half a discarded roll, its crust mottled with ash. She took a bite like it was a gift from heaven. Inside the bakery, a voice rose sharply. "Get away from there," cried the baker's wife. "Go on, girl, begging in the dirt like some dog, filthy runaway." The door burst open. The woman stumbled back from the barrel, crumbs falling from her lips. "I said go!" The baker's wife raised a broom, swatting at the air. "You got nerve coming back here?" Sawyer stepped forward, blocking the wind with his body. His eyes settled on the girl's face. Wide eyes, cheeks sunken, lips cracked. He turned back toward the shop door and stepped inside. "I'll take a fresh loaf," he said, voice low. The baker's wife huffed but handed it over, still warm from the oven. Sawyer paid, turned, and walked straight back into the cold. He crouched in front of the girl and held out the bread. She stared at him, blinking snowflakes from her lashes. "A lady shouldn't ever have to beg for bread," he said. She didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, as if unsure whether she was awake or dreaming, she reached for the loaf. "I thank you," she whispered. "I did not mean to." He shook his head. "Eat." She bit into the loaf. A sound escaped her throat, something between relief and disbelief. Her fingers trembled. She ate as though afraid someone would snatch it away. The baker's wife scoffed. "She's the one ran off from the Avril wedding," she said, loud enough for all nearby to hear. "Stole her groom's jewels, they say. Threw away a fortune. And for what? Wandering in snow like a lost lamb." The girl froze mid-bite. Sawyer looked at her again. "Is that true?" She lowered the bread. "My name is Margot LeClaire," she said softly. "I was supposed to marry Lucas Averill, but I ran. That's all." Sawyer studied her face, haunted but proud. "That your business or mine?" he asked. She blinked. "I suppose not." He nodded once, satisfied. Behind them the wind picked up again, cruel and sharp. She hugged the loaf close, her teeth chattering now that her hands were free. "You got somewhere warm tonight?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just behind the saloon. They let me sleep near the stables if I keep quiet." Sawyer reached into his coat. He pulled out his scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. She gasped. "I'll be back before sundown," he said simply. "Don't go too far." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the white haze. Margot stood still in the snow, a half-eaten loaf in her hands and a scarf that smelled faintly of smoke and pine around her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, her breath didn't hurt so much. And someone had looked at her, not with disgust or judgment, but like she was still worth saving. Margot finished the loaf slowly, each bite chewed with aching care, as though it were holy, as though it might be the last thing she'd ever taste. The crust was dry, the inside gone slightly stale, but to her it was warm gold. Nourishment. Mercy. Sawyer had vanished into the wash of snow and dusk, his figure swallowed by the hush of Dry Creek's Main Street. But the scarf he'd left behind was still clutched around her shoulders, its wool scratchy, its scent faintly like smoke and horse saddle and something steady. She drew it tighter, as if it might keep the rest of the world out. She was behind the saloon now, tucked in the narrow space between the feed room and the broken fence, back pressed to cold timber, knees drawn tight, her hands buried beneath her legs for what little warmth she could find. Her breath hung in the air, pale and fleeting. No one spoke to her directly as the sun slipped behind the distant ridge, but they spoke plenty around her. Herod and her little one. "She's the runaway from New Hope," someone muttered outside the general store, their voice half curious, half scornful. "I heard she stole the Everill family's emerald brooch," a woman added, "worth more than this whole dusty town." "Some spoiled plantation princess," another spat, "thinks if she plays poor, we'll hand her sympathy." "They've got a bounty out on her," a man said flatly. "Real money, dead or alive, I reckon." Margot had heard worse. She'd been trained to survive on silence, to pull herself inward until she became invisible. Even when standing right in the middle of the world, she knew how to disappear. But the whispers still sliced, not because they were lies, but because they were nearly true. The alley beside the saloon reeked of mildew hay, sour whiskey, and cold regret. The stable hand had let her stay, though not with words. He had simply looked away when she curled up behind the feed barrels, and that was kindness enough. No one else came near. The bartender had dropped a half-crushed tin of beans that morning, muttered, "Don't make trouble," and vanished again behind the swinging doors. The wind came hard that night, sharper than a whip. Her coat, already thin, had soaked through at the seams. Her boots squelched with every step. She'd long stopped feeling her toes, or her hands, or her heart, until she heard it. Soft, intentional footsteps. Margot tensed, her breath catching. Her fingers reached beneath the hay for a jagged slat of broken wood she'd hidden earlier, just in case. But the figure stepping through the shadows made her freeze. "Sawyer." He said nothing at first. His hat was pulled low, his shoulders dusted with snow. In his gloved hands, he carried a wool blanket, thick, worn, folded with care. And something else. A knife, modest, iron-handled, glinting under the slice of moonlight. He knelt beside her and, without a word, draped the blanket across her lap. Then he set the knife gently by her boot. No flourish, no grand gesture. Just quiet protection. Sawyer looked up, finally meeting her eyes. Margot blinked. Her throat felt too tight. "I." He beat the snow off his gloves, straightened, and said, "I figured you might sleep better knowing you had a way to protect yourself." She looked from the blade to him, her voice breaking. "Why?" "You're not livestock," he replied simply. "You don't deserve to freeze like one." And just like that, something splintered inside her. It wasn't loud, just a breath, released with a sound that bordered on a sob. Her shoulders quaked. Her face crumpled. Tears came. Hot, unstoppable, not out of terror or hunger or cold, but because someone, finally, had looked at her and seen more than what the world had labeled her. He had seen her worth. Sawyer didn't linger. He gave one final nod and turned back into the snowfall, vanishing once more. Margot stared after him, clutching the blanket to her chest, rocking slowly as tears slid down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't a fugitive. She was something else. She was human. The morning came, pale and windless, like the world itself was holding its breath. Dry Creek stirred slowly. Smoke rising from chimneys, boots crunching frost, wagons creaking past shuttered storefronts. Sawyer Reed stood outside the feed room with 2 horses saddled and waiting. Margot blinked up at him from behind the stable door, still wrapped in the wool blanket he had left her the night before. "You ready to get out of this place?" he asked, not unkindly. She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "Where would I go?" He gave a small shrug. "My place is quiet, plenty of room. No one there but me, a few hens, and the land. You're not worried what people will say?" she asked. "I stopped caring about people's talk years ago." He searched his face for a long moment. Then, without another word, she stepped forward. They rode out of Dry Creek just after sunrise, frost still clinging to the tall grass. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air. For miles they said nothing. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was like a blanket itself, stitched with mutual understanding. It was Margot who finally broke it. "I was not always running," she said quietly. Sawyer didn't turn his head, just kept riding beside her, listening. "My family, LeClaire, we were once someone. We owned land in Georgia, had a house with columns and white curtains, and a piano in the parlor. What happened? The war." She said it like a graveyard name. "My father came back bitter and broken. The land was burned, the money gone, but pride, that survived. So he did what broken Southern men do." She swallowed. "He sold me off. To Lucas Averill, a railroad heir. Northern money, Southern cruelty. It was supposed to save us." Sawyer's jaw shifted slightly, but he remained silent. "I knew something was wrong the moment I met him. The way he looked at me, like livestock. And worse, the way he treated the staff." Her voice dropped. "I found one of the housemaids crying in the pantry. He had cornered her, left bruises." "What did you do?" "I told my father. He said we should be grateful the Averills even considered us, that girls like her should know their place." "And you?" "I told Lucas I would not marry a man who beat women." Sawyer finally turned his eyes toward her. "He laughed," Margot said, voice tight. "Said if I refused him, he would tell the world I stole from him. Said the brooch my mother left me, the one I planned to wear at the ceremony, he would call it stolen. Said the shawl I packed was part of the dowry, that the locket I wore since I was 12 was his gift, and I had no right to it. Or he'd sold it." "So you ran," Sawyer said softly. She nodded. "I took only what was mine, and now there's a bounty on my head." They reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The wind lifted Margot's hair as she turned toward him. "You can turn back," she said, suddenly aware of what she was dragging him into. "I will not blame you." Sawyer dismounted without a word. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He handed it to her, then looked out over the hills, quiet for a long moment. Then he said it. "If that's a crime," his voice calm but firm, "then every woman with a backbone should be behind bars." Margot stared at him, her eyes wide. A sound left her lips, part disbelief, part laughter, part something close to relief. He glanced at her then, and something like a smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. "We're not going back," he added. "Not unless you want to." She shook her head, her throat tight. "I want to go forward." He nodded. "Then forward it is." They rode on into the morning mist, toward the high country, toward a place where pasts were not erased, but where maybe, just maybe, they could be outrun. The first snow fell gently, like a lullaby over the mountains. Margot stood at the edge of the porch, a woven basket in her hands, watching flakes melt on her sleeves. The world had gone still, white, quiet, and wide. Life at Sawyer's homestead unfolded without ceremony. He rose before the sun, fed the animals, chopped wood, mended what needed mending. Margot did not ask to help, but he handed her small tasks like it was the most natural thing in the world. She washed clothes by the creek, learned to build a fire that would not choke the cabin with smoke, and slowly began to understand the rhythm of a life shaped by necessity. They said little. The silence between them was not cold, it was the respectful kind. Margot kept her distance, and Sawyer gave it willingly. One morning, as she struggled to balance a heavy bucket of water, he appeared beside her and took the handle wordlessly. That afternoon he showed her how to make cornbread, using molasses and flour. She burned the first batch. He didn't laugh, just poured her a glass of milk and told her to try again. By the second week he offered to teach her to ride properly. "You'll need it," he said. "Can't live out here on foot forever." She was stiff in the saddle, and her hands fumbled the reins, but she learned. The next day he placed a rifle in her arms. "Just in case," he said, tone even. Margot had never touched a gun before. Her hands trembled. But he stood behind her, quiet, steady, guiding her grip, correcting her aim. "You're not trying to kill," he said. "You're trying to survive." There were no pet names, no flirtations. He called her Miss LeClaire or nothing at all. She called him Mr. Reed. But at night she sometimes caught him glancing at her across the fire, and something soft flickered in the space between them. Was she, too? Then came the fever. It started as a chill in her spine. By nightfall she was shivering uncontrollably, her skin damp with sweat, breath shallow. Sawyer found her curled in bed, cheeks flushed with heat. He didn't hesitate. He placed a cold rag on her forehead, stoked the fire higher, and sat beside her with a basin of water and a cloth. Through the night he did not leave. He changed the cloth on her head, coaxed her to sip water, whispered to her even when she could not answer. When her breathing grew rapid, he picked up a tattered book of poems from the shelf and began to read aloud. His voice was rough, the words simple, but they came with care. "And though the night be cold and long, I'll wait until you find your song." He read until the oil lamp burned low. Then he set the book down and simply sat there, watching her face. By dawn, the fever broke. Margot's eyes opened slowly. Light spilled in through the cracked shutter, painting gold across the wooden floor. She saw him first. Not the room, not the fire, not the window. Sawyer, asleep in the chair beside her, head tilted slightly, one hand still holding hers. Their fingers were laced together, not out of duty, not from routine, but because he had reached for her and had not let go. Her lips parted. She said nothing, but something warm pressed behind her ribs. Not just relief. Something else. He had been afraid to lose her. A snow had piled thick on the rooftops by the time trouble came knocking. It was late afternoon. The fire burned low in the hearth, and Margot was peeling potatoes when the sound of hooves broke the stillness outside. Sawyer rose from his chair, motioned for her to stay back, and stepped onto the porch. A man sat astride a black gelding, long coat dusted with frost, a rifle slung across his back. He had the look of someone who had ridden far and fast, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "You Sawyer Reed?" the man asked, voice flat. Sawyer nodded. "Who's asking?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Ethan Cole, bounty hunter. I'm here on lawful grounds." Sawyer took the paper, unfolded it. Margot watched from the shadows just inside the door, her heart hammering in her chest. The words were clear. Wanted, Margot LeClaire. Theft of dowry goods, absconding from legal engagement. Reward, $200, 0 cents. Authorized by Lucas Averill, Georgia. Sawyer folded the paper slowly. "She's not here." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "She was," Sawyer said. "Came through weeks ago, sick and half dead. I gave her food and fire. She left 2 mornings back." "You let a wanted fugitive walk?" "I let a girl walk. If she was anything else, I didn't see it." The bounty hunter looked past him toward the cabin. "Mind if I check?" Sawyer didn't move. "I do." Tension crackled in the cold air like a tight wire, ready to snap. But after a long moment, Cole just clicked his tongue and tugged his reins. "If she comes back, and you're found harboring her, you'll answer for it. You understand?" Sawyer gave a single nod. "I understand more than you think." The rider turned. Snow scattered under his horse's hooves as he disappeared down the ridge. Sawyer watched until the man was a shadow in the trees. Then he turned and walked back inside. Margot was gone. He found her tracks in the snow, small prints leading away from the house, toward the narrow path into the canyons. He saddled his horse and followed, riding until the sky turned orange with dusk. She was huddled beneath a rock overhang, her coat wrapped tight around her, face pale from cold and fear. "You should not have come," she said as he dismounted. "I should not have let you go," he answered. I couldn't let him drag you into this. I'm already in it. She looked up at him then, eyes rimmed with red. I am not worth the trouble, Sawyer. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt in front of her, took her hands in his, cold and shaking. Then he said, quietly but firmly, I don't need your innocence, Margaret. I just want your presence. The words hung in the canyon like a vow. Not loud, not showy, just truth. Margot blinked. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't look away. Are you sure? She whispered. Sawyer squeezed her hand. I have lived with silence for so long, and now, with you, it's still quiet, but it feels alive. She pressed her forehead against his chest. He held her there, against the cold, against the fear, against the lie of her unworthiness. They returned to the cabin under cover of night. No papers, no promises, just a man who had chosen, and a woman no longer running. Word traveled fast in Dry Creek, as it always did. By the following week, whispers curled around every porch and shop front. Children were hushed when Margot passed. Some women crossed the street. A few men spat tobacco with more venom than usual. They said she was a thief, a liar, a runaway bride with a price on her head. But there were others, quiet ones, who remembered. Mrs. Delaney, the widow who ran the apothecary, stood in the post office one morning, hands trembling, as she spoke to the sheriff. My daughter, Clara, was near death once. Fever took her lungs, couldn't breathe. The doctor had gone to the next town, and it was Margot. Yes, that same girl, who stayed up all night with her, mixed the herbs, read from the Psalms. Clara lived. Ask anyone. The sheriff rubbed his chin, uncertain. That was years ago. Some kindness don't expire, Mrs. Delaney said, and neither should our memory. At the chapel, Reverend Calhoun sat down by lantern light and wrote a letter, his long fingers moving carefully across the parchment. He had been a Confederate chaplain once, then a wanderer, now a shepherd to a small flock. To whom it may concern, he wrote, I have known Miss Margot LeClaire in spirit and deed. I do not know the full truth of her past, but I know the content of her present character. She is not a danger to society. She is its quiet redemption. He signed the letter with a flourish and posted it to the circuit judge in Cheyenne. Back at the homestead, Margot moved carefully through her days. She cooked, mended, fed the animals, but she avoided the windows, avoided town. The weight of accusation bent her shoulders lower each week. You can go, she said to Sawyer one night, if it gets too much. He set his coffee cup down slowly. It's not too much? But the way they look at you now, as if you're compromised. He leaned forward. You think I live for their glances? Margot said nothing. They weren't there, Sawyer continued. They didn't see you crawl through snow with bleeding feet. They didn't see you stitch my coat, or sit by that colt when it was sick. You've stood beside life and death, and chose to stay. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. That Saturday the townsfolk gathered in the market square. It was market day, but the air carried more tension than usual. Someone had circulated the bounty poster. Copies hung on the general store's window, the saloon's wall, even the church's notice board. The sheriff was there, so was the mayor, the reverend, farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, and Sawyer. He rode into town slow and steady, dismounted, and walked straight into the center of the square. A hush fell. She's not hiding, he said. I am not hiding her. He unfolded a single sheet of paper, the bounty notice, and held it in the air. This is what you've all seen, but it's not what I've seen. He turned slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. You want to know who Margot LeClaire is? She's a woman who's fought harder for survival than most men I know. She ran from a marriage that would have killed her spirit. Or worse, she didn't run from shame. She ran to survive. A murmur swept the crowd. He let the words settle. I don't know about you, but I've lived in this territory long enough to tell a coward from the brave. Margot is brave. She is honest. She is my choice. Someone near the front, Mrs. Delaney, stepped forward. He's right, she said. "That girl saved my child." Then another voice. "The Reverend. I've sent a letter to the court. If this community stands for second chances, let it stand now." A third voice, then a fourth. Soon, a dozen. Sawyer didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just looked up at the sheriff. "Well," Sheriff Dobson took off his hat. "I reckon. This town's made its decision. I'll send word to Cheyenne. Tell them we're not harboring a criminal. We're protecting one of our own." Sawyer nodded once, then turned and walked back toward his horse. From the edge of the square, Margot watched from behind the blacksmith's hall, hidden, but not for long. She pressed her hand to her chest, breath shallow. She was not a ghost anymore. She was a name, a person, a woman claimed not with chains, but with courage. The sun was warm that morning, casting golden light over the rolling fields behind the cabin. Spring had come early to Dry Creek. Snow melted, wildflowers pushed through the thawed soil, and everything felt touched by renewal. Under the wide Wyoming sky, a few chairs had been set out in a crescent on the soft grass. A makeshift altar of stacked stone stood near a blooming hawthorn tree. There were no decorations save for nature, no music save for the breeze and birdsong, and no crowd, just the people who mattered. Mrs. Delaney sat in the front row, holding her daughter's hand. Reverend Calhoun stood at the center, Bible tucked beneath his arm. The blacksmith, the stable boy, and the widow from the edge of town who had once given Margot an apple, all came with simple smiles and kind eyes. Margot stepped out from behind the cabin, the wind catching the hem of her old white dress. It had belonged to her mother once, plain, cotton, aged with time, but the lace collar still held. Her dark hair was braided low, and nestled behind her ear was a single wild daisy. Sawyer had picked it himself that morning. He stood waiting at the altar, hands steady, boots dusted, wearing his cleanest shirt, though the elbow was still patched. He didn't need to be polished. He needed to be real. And he was. As Margot walked toward him, her eyes locked on his, the world seemed to pause. The years of fear, of fleeing, of hiding, fell away with every step. Reverend Calhoun opened his Bible, but even he seemed caught in the hush that surrounded them. "We gather today," he began, "not to erase the past, but to mark the start of something chosen, something true." He looked at them both. "Do you speak your vows from freedom?" Sawyer nodded. "I do." Margot glanced down, her voice soft. "I do." The Reverend stepped back slightly. "Then speak your hearts." Sawyer reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small slip of paper, but didn't read from it. He folded it again and met her gaze. "I have no land to give you that you do not already walk upon. No gold, no fancy name, but I give you every day that remains in me. I give you my silence and my storms, my hands, my hearth, and what heart I have left." Margot's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. She whispered her own vow, barely loud enough for the breeze to carry. "I once thought survival was all I could hope for, but you gave me stillness and space and something I never dared ask for, dignity. I promise to keep your fire lit and your name safe, and to love you in the quiet ways that last." A long pause. Then Margot looked up, voice trembling. "Huh? No, I don't think it will. Are you sure this is what you want?" Sawyer didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, took her hand, and said simply, "I've never been more sure of anything." Reverend Calhoun raised his voice just enough. "Then by the grace of God and the will of those who stand here, I pronounce you man and wife." No applause followed. Only silence, and in it, something deeper. Sawyer leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers. Not a kiss for show, but a touch that said, "We made it," and that was enough. Years had passed since that cold winter in Dry Creek. The small wooden cabin still stood, a little grayer now, with a porch that creaked when the wind blew and shutters that held firm through every storm. Wildflowers blanketed the field around it, lupine, primrose, Indian paintbrush, swaying gently beneath the sun. The fence had been freshly painted. The gate still swung open with the same soft squeak, but what filled the air now, more than anything else, was laughter. Children's laughter. Margot sat beneath the apricot tree, where blossoms fluttered like snow in the warm spring breeze. Her fingers moved gently, looping soft cream yarn into the beginnings of a tiny sweater. Beside her sat a wooden cradle, carved by hand, its sides adorned with daisies and hearts. Sawyer had spent a week working on it, shaving and sanding, humming to himself in the barn, while the baby inside her grew. Footsteps crunched softly over the earth. Sawyer appeared, dust on his shirt and a faint scratch across one cheek. On his shoulder their 3-year-old son lay curled, fast asleep, arms hanging limp. Margot smiled. "Fell asleep on the horse again?" she teased. Sawyer chuckled quietly. "He is his father's son." He eased the boy down into the grass beside her, letting him nestle against her skirts. Margot's hand went to her belly, round and firm beneath her cotton dress. A second life stirred within. She looked up at Sawyer, eyes warm. "I used to think," she murmured, "that home wasn't meant for me, that I'd always be running or hiding or barely surviving." Her voice caught, and she looked out across the field, where a neighbor's girl chased after a clutch of baby chicks, giggling and barefoot. "But now," she whispered, "I don't just have a home, I have a life." Sawyer knelt beside her, pressing one calloused palm gently over her stomach. "You gave this place meaning," he said. "You made it somewhere a man could stop wandering and stay." Their foreheads touched. No promises spoken, none needed. Every sunrise, every shared meal, every midnight whisper had been their vow. From the porch, the smell of baking bread floated through the air, a pie cooling on the windowsill, the same recipe Margot had learned in the dark days, when hope was still a foreign taste. She looked to the sky, bathed in gold, then spoke, in a voice soft as cotton. "I don't need my name in any history book," she said. "Just let it be whispered when a child laughs, when a man lays down his burdens, and when someone calls a house home." A small wooden sign hung above the cabin door, worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Its letters, carved by hand, still read, "Where bread was offered, a family was born." If that story stirred something in your heart, if it made you believe again in second chances, in quiet love, in the kind of home that is built not from wood, but from trust, then don't forget to tap the like button, drop us a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales where hearts beat louder than gunfire, and love grows where no one thought it could. Out here, under the wide open sky, every story leaves a mark, and we're just getting started. Until next time, partner, ride gently, love deeply.